this time to thank you for your service and the service to your country, and what a pleasure it's been to be able to serve with you, and wish you the very best in everything that you do into the future. Now, I'm standing here again on a budget bill, and although much of this budget was important because it helped through this crisis, help families, businesses, and ensuring that they had some kind of income so that they could manage through this crisis. But it's also important that we talk about how it potentially will burden the future of many families and younger people as we've amounted to this enormous debt. Now, this February, I was appointed as the Shadow Minister for COVID-19 Economic Recovery. And it's been an incredible honor to serve in this role, because it's given me an opportunity to go across the country virtually and be able to look at the economic impacts that this COVID has had on every sector, every region, and every demographic of the country. Now, let me start with this, that a strong economic recovery should be inclusive to all demographics, sectors, and regions. Now, ensuring that all persons in all areas of the country thrives, and that we should have specific objectives with measurable strategies for every sector to ensure that nobody gets left behind. So it's impossible to implement a cookie-cutter kind of plan, which is pretty much what I see in this Liberal budget. And we will not get a full recovery unless we look at every economic sector to make sure that they're successful. Now, the budget outlined how the federal Liberals propose to rebuild the Canadian economy in a way that will bring Canadians along. Another example of a lot of talk, but not with a clear, precise, strategic, thoughtful action by this government. So if this government was actually interested in bringing all Canadians along, they would have laid out outcomes for job creation, growth and prosperity in this country's agricultural sector, maybe their energy sector, the forestry sector, the natural resources sector, just to name a few. And there's millions of Canadians that work in these sectors. So it's time that the government at least got honest about what they're trying to accomplish. Because quite frankly, it seems like we're stuck in this never-ending cycle of spending more to achieve less. All talk and all no action. Now, I hearken back to when I first had the opportunity to get involved in as a contributor to the economy. So I was able to buy into a business when I was 21 years old. And I look back at those times and look how I looked at the world as my oyster, that I would be able to do something, build something, grow something. Sadly, I don't hear that from youth anymore. I don't see that in this budget, and it doesn't necessarily set people up for success. Now, a bunch of stats have come out of this budget. Largest debt and deficit that we've seen in the history of our country, and yet very minimal to show for it. We're certainly not moving forwards. In fact, I often think we're moving backwards. So it's important that we look at a few stats. Canada fell out of the top 10 ranking of the most competitive economies. We have fallen near the bottom of our peer group on innovation, ranking 17th, as stated by the World Intellectual Property Organization. Canada ranks 11th amongst G7 countries among 29 industrial countries with a net to GDP ratio of 33%, and Canada fell to 25th of 29 countries. In other words, Canada's got the 5th highest level of total indebtedness. No other country experienced such a pronounced decline in its debt ranking. The debt to GDP ratio will rise from 31% last year to 56% this year. Bank of Canada projects business investments to grow at 0.8% over the next 2 years, failing to recover to 2019 levels until 2023. Consumption and government spending will represent about 80% of economic growth over the next 2 years, while investment in next exports will be next to zero. And an important industry like mineral fuels accounted for 22% of our country's exports, #1 exported product, something we shouldn't forget about. And we still have the 3rd largest proven oil reserves in the world and the 3rd largest exporter of oil. Just as this government continued to do since 2015, they've ignored the Canadian natural resource industry. There is virtually no mention of the energy sector, which is Canada's #1 export. Now, by ignoring the strength of Canada's resource and forestry sectors, ag sectors, among others, This government has failed to recognize the impact these sectors would have on our battered economy. The world wants and they need more of our natural resources. So we should be thinking about expanding our market share, not hastening its decline. Now, at the very least, we should be trying to develop policies that make sure that we have an active role in these sectors. Now, there's an entire chapter in this budget dedicated to environmental initiatives aimed at net zero emissions by 2050 that includes $18 billion in spending, but dubious assumptions on the impact on economic growth. So rather than supporting a proven catalyst for economic growth like the natural resource sector to accelerate Canadians' recovery and get Canadians back to work, the Prime Minister has decided to continue abandonment on this industry and hedge our future on uncertain technologies. Now, we're not opposed to developing and enhancing Canada's environmental-orientated sector. In fact, I, alongside with the Conservative Party, highly encourage Canadian market participants in this sector to continue to grow and create more jobs and revenue while making sufficient contributions to the nation's ecological sustainability. I'm proud of our industry. Our industry has been doing fantastic work and are leaders in the world, and we should be proud of that and we should stand up for that. So as we continue to combat this pandemic and the economic damage it was caused, we must unleash and utilize capabilities of all profitable revenue streams. That includes green technologies and natural resources. So there's some vague references in the budget to growing green jobs and retraining the workforce to new jobs. It's very vague. Where and which sectors will these jobs going to be created? By when? Words are great, but actions speak louder. The province I come from, people want to know, if you're retraining me into a green job, tell me where that job will be, tell me what kind of income I will get from it, and tell me how I'm going to be able to support my family in this new role. So we've heard lots about retraining for these jobs that don't exist yet. And the need for tradespeople only happens if you can approve something and get it built in this country. So what's it going to take? The economy will grow. It has to be private sector driven. The high cost of doing business in Canada, red tape, over-regulation, makes it almost impossible for small business owners. That has to change. There's been a real and visible impact on Canada's capacity to attract foreign investment. We need to be able to tell people they're welcome in this country and their investments welcome. The perceived risk around investing in Canada's energy sector, that's got to change. So what does the future look like, and what's the trajectory? What does the country look like? We see inflation now. The target was 2%. We're running about 3.6%. It's very concerning for people who are trying to live on a budget. My biggest fear for the country is that this budget will continue to invest massive sums of money into under-tested, underproductive schemes that fits this government's political agenda. Titled Recovery Plan for Jobs, Growth and Resilience, the federal government's budget contains very little details on specifics, lack of measurables, and it really doesn't tell you how they're going to execute on this plan. I'm concerned this budget is far from resilient and far from sustainable. If it were resilience that this government was after for, then they would be asking themselves, how is this federal spending going to position our country for post-pandemic success? We need to ensure that any spending that we have helps with productivity in this country and ensures that we have long-term sustainability. The well-being of our people and our economy cannot afford to stuck in this never-ending cycle of government's game of throwing money into the wind and hoping something sticks. The most important and impactful focus for our country right now needs to be investment and commitment to ensuring Canadians get back to work. That's why the Conservative Party of Canada will implement the Canada Recovery Plan, a plan that will recover the hundreds of thousands of jobs in these hardest hit sectors. Canadians deserve strong leadership, inclusive leadership, and a robust plan for not only recovery, but of prosperity for many years to come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Tabik-Mactaquac.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Honourable. colleague from Edmonton Center for his remarks, very thoughtful remarks. And